They say the truth has a face. Mine stared back at me from a scrap of paper and smiled like a guillotine. My name is Wesley Howard. I was 26, a house husband and a trader of small things, when the picture of my life began to peel away. If you had come to our tree-lined street in Ohio in 1973, you would have seen Alexandria's car in the drive, the perfectly trimmed lawn, my boys, Liam and Olivier, kicking a ball on the pavement, and the steam rising from a pot of soup on the stove. You would have assumed, as everyone did, that we were ordinary, even lucky. You would not have seen the hunger behind her hands. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from, city/country. And drop your take in the comments as you watch. Share your reaction, opinions, and what you think really happened. I read them all. We'll be giving shoutouts to standout comments and videos in the next upload, so make sure yours counts. Alexandria was from money. Her family owned houses and accounts that carried comfortable names. That inheritance should have been a safety net, but for her it was only a starting point. Covetousness sat in her like an ache. It made ordinary comfort taste like poverty. She wanted more than she'd been given. She wanted Hudson's kind of more. Bigger houses, louder power, a life that required no modesty. That's why, in the beginning, I thought I was merely a placeholder, a husband waiting to be discarded. Our marriage had rules Alexandria kept. I cooked. I raised the boys. I learned to keep quiet about money and talk about the weather. Her proud phrase to me was simple and cold. You have a roof over your head and food on the table. I took that phrase as a warning. I took it as a sentence. For years, suspicion was a dull instrument in my chest, something I used when questions arose. I never expected it would become an engine of survival. The ulcer came like punishment. One April afternoon, pain laced my gut so sharply that I walked into her office looking for antacids. The door was locked, the hum of the heater like a secret. In my search, I knocked a book from the shelf. A leather diary tumbled free, and inside it, folded and wrinkled, was Angelina's handwriting. I read the sentence 3 times before my mind would accept it for what it was. If he ever discovers the truth, don't hesitate to kill him. For a moment my head emptied. Threat. Fear. Truth. The 3 words seemed to rearrange the room. I remember folding the note back into the diary with more care than I'd ever shown and closing her office as if I had not been there at all. I cooked dinner that night. I set the table. I fed my sons and played the father I had always been. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. But everything had. That evening I watched her differently. Discreetly. She was the same woman, polished, precise, the flattering posture of wealth. Yet small changes stabbed at me. The way she hid drawers, the quickness of her phone conversations, the sudden detachment when I asked about her audit trips. Deceit, I learned, is patient. It does not announce itself with fireworks. It burrows. I did not confront her because confrontation would have been to wave a red flag. A man who storms a house and demands answers is easy to explain away. A husband who becomes an investigator is harder to fit into their narrative. Discretion became my first ally. Investigation the second. I became a quiet collector of moments, receipts, half-said names, and the ghost edges of conversations. Every small thing became evidence in my mind. My trading background taught me to watch patterns. My mother had taught me how to read slow changes in the market and how a small shift could mean a tsunami of consequence. That same practice translated into a different currency. Attention. I began to track Alexandria's days, the Mondays she called audit visits that coincided with Hudson's meetings, the late-night phone calls she ended when I entered the room. I cataloged her generosity that now looked like rehearsal for leaving. Folded bills that app. Fear is a peculiar fuel. It makes you small and sharp and clever in the same heartbeat. I learned to smile and to contain the panic behind strategy. The first time I imagined the notes he as my name, I felt a cold clarity. This was bigger than a divorce. This was an escape plan with deadly stakes. Betrayal had shifted into an active, dangerous scheme. I slept badly that week, measuring every creak of the house as if the walls themselves might be plotting. In the morning, I would stand in the kitchen and watch my boys and pretend not to know the danger crouching in our home. Forgiveness, I decided, is a luxury for later. For the moment, evidence and strategy were my mercy. I began planning. They called Alexandria precise and practical. They were right. She could make numbers sing and silence a room with a spreadsheet. What they never noticed was how precision can edge into appetite. Practicality turned into a hunger that no family trust could feed. After the diary, I began to map her days. Mondays were sacred. Audit trips, she called them, and she left with the brisk certainty of someone rehearsing an exit. She returned later with lipstick smudged or a nervous laugh she tried on for size. When I asked, she offered the same cool line, "Work matters." I played the easy role. It kept the boys fed and the house intact. But I was counting things other people ignored. Suspicion, once a whisper, became my tool. Alexandria had money enough to live well. But money had not softened her. It sharpened her appetite. Inheritance, for her, was a threshold to more. She wanted Hudson's abundance, the louder homes, the influence, the reward that never looked back. Greed made her dangerous in small, polite ways. It taught her to dress selfishness as aspiration. Choosing Hudson was not just passion. It was an upgrade in her moral accounting. I learned to notice the differences between being careful and being hungry. Where a person protects what they have, a covetous person studies how to expand it at someone else's expense. I began keeping quiet ledgers of my own. Time she left, the name she softened into affection on the phone, the night she returned smelling faintly of other places. Deceit proved patient. It didn't explode. It crept. One day I found a receipt for a ring, then an address in Indianapolis. The address belonged to Hudson. The evidence was small and ordinary. But ordinary things are the backbone of a true picture. People who lie depend on the notion that small things will be overlooked. I learned to treat small things as the map to the whole. Angelina showed me how thorough they were. As the bank manager, she made careful accounts seem inevitable. She could hide a ghost ledger the same way she hid a tired expression behind a smile. To outsiders, everything was professional. To me, patterns began to align. Envelopes sent at specific times, invoices altered so figures nudged into other columns, a transfer scheduled to appear routine but timed with a shipment deadline so no one would look twice. Watching Alexandria choose appetite over family felt like grief stitched into everyday tasks. It gnawed not only at my trust but at the assumption that we matter more than her next advantage. Infidelity was one hurt. The deeper wound was the conversion of love into transaction. She measured relationships by profit and loss. I could have reacted. I could have stormed into her office with a diary in my hands and screamed a hollow truth into silence. But a dramatic reveal was a risk. I learned to value discretion. If I became the upset husband, the story would be simpler for them to spin. I would be the villain whose jealousy justified their escape. So I chose to be invisible. I would collect evidence, not accusations. In those weeks I cultivated 3 habits. Observation without alarm, documentation without notes that could be traced, and patience. Observation meant watching the rhythm of her life, noting what disappeared and what she replaced. Documentation meant photographing receipts and secretly copying letters at the library. Patience meant waiting for inconsistencies to mount until they could no longer be explained away. Small towns swallow scandal, but they also forget details. Expectations simplify stories. I refused simplification. I resisted the local gossip and instead built my own record. Each piece of paper I copied, every timestamp I recorded, made a lattice of proof. Even Angelina's meticulousness became useful. Her care left trails that I could follow if I was steady enough. People ask why a man would stay when the marriage is broken. For me, staying was an act of strategy. It was not about forgiveness. It was about protecting my boys and making sure we would not be collateral damage. I refused to let Alexandria's covetousness become our sentence. I would be the quiet engineer of a different outcome. That is how the house of comfort turned into a place of work. My kitchen table became a command center. I balanced household chores with the oddity of detective work. My trade instincts, attention to small shifts, patience, and an eye for pattern, translated well. What began as suspicion hardened into a plan. Gather indisputable evidence, find allies who could not be bribed, and prepare an escape route for my children. The slow arithmetic of survival had begun. The pain arrived like a warning bell I could no longer ignore. My ulcer flared one April afternoon and pushed me toward a door I had never opened. The study Alexandria kept locked. I told myself I only needed antacids. I did not expect a page to fall that would redraw my life. In that quiet room, among neat folders and inked ledgers, a leather diary slid from a shelf and a folded note dropped free. Angelina's handwriting looked ordinary until I read the sentence. "If he ever discovers the truth, don't hesitate to kill him." The words landed with a solidity I could not deny. Threat, fear, truth. In that order, the note rearranged what I believed about my marriage. I closed the diary carefully, replaced it on the shelf, and walked out of the room as if nothing had happened. Back in the kitchen, I made soup, set plates, and kept my voice steady while my mind performed a different kind of work. I did not confront Alexandria. Confrontation felt dangerous and theatrical. If I had stormed the study with the diary in hand, I would have given them a story to tell, the mad, jealous husband undone by emotion. Discretion was the safer weapon. I decided then that my role would be collector, not accuser. I would gather proof that would not be dismissed as paranoia. The days after the discovery were a study in small betrayals. I watched her hands when she clasped a cup, listened to which name she guarded, and noted the moments when she became suddenly distracted. Simple things that had always used to be part of our domestic rhythm, bills on the counter, letters in the drawer, began to feel like puzzle pieces. I had never imagined I would find meaning in a receipt or a return address, but suddenly these things had weight. Practicality became my guide. I bought a small lockbox and hid essentials. Birth certificates, some cash, a few changes of clothing. Not an escape plan, I told myself, but a contingency. Insurance against a collapse I was beginning to suspect. I used preparation to turn fear into motion. Gathering evidence required caution. I could not trust that any conversation at the market or the barber would stay private. So I used public places to work. At the library, I sat under a dim reading lamp and copied names and dates from documents I photographed on the sly. I learned how to photograph letters quickly, how to slide a receipt into my pocket without seeming clumsy, how to read a ledger without raising suspicion. Ordinary errands turned into missions of quiet documentation. Angelina's role emerged through pattern more than proclamation. As bank manager, she handled transfers and could make a ghost ledger look routine. She was careful, which paradoxically made her trail easier to follow. Meticulous people leave predictable marks. Every altered invoice, every scheduled transfer that coincided with Alexandria's away days, tightened a net of evidence around a plan I had not imagined. At home, my performance of normalcy needed to be flawless. I made the boys laugh, fixed Olivier's scraped knees, and kept dinner conversations light. Publicly, I was the steady father. Privately, I examined my copies. Evidence, I realized, grows like a mosaic. You only see the image when many small tiles are in place. The diary's note sharpened my moral calculus. It was not only an admission of intent, it was a blueprint for danger. It suggested collusion, heat, and the willingness to remove obstacles. That reality forced me to think beyond marital betrayal toward criminal risk. My job changed from husband to protector, and my tools changed: documentation, discretion, and a plan for allies. There were nights I could not sleep. I would sit at our kitchen table with a lamp low and flip through photocopies while the house breathed around me. The fear settled into a focus, sharp and functional. Small accumulations of knowledge replaced the initial panic. I moved step by careful step, because the diary had lit a fuse I intended to control. Once you learn a secret, the smallest sounds start to speak. After the diary, our home changed register. Alexandria moved through rooms with a practiced lightness while I cataloged details. A drawer closed too quickly, a laugh that stopped when I entered, a coat left at the door, each became a clue. I learned to read gestures the way others read faces. My days split into two parts: the public man and the private observer. By daylight I fixed leaks, took the boys to school, and kept the market routine. By night I kept a ledger of behavior. Dates, times, small oddities that together formed a pattern. The ledger was messy: lipstick on a cup, a boxed receipt, an unexpected perfume. Each small note felt heavy. compelling me to look for meaning where others saw normalcy. Alexandria's inheritance had been plenty, but she behaved like a woman whose appetite could never be sated. Money had become identity for her. Not a shield, but a ladder to climb higher. Hudson offered more of that climb. He owned influence and sparkle beyond our town, and that difference explained why Alexandria was drawn to him. Greed, I realized, makes people clever about how they justify taking. Angelina was the kind of careful person who made danger look bureaucratic. As bank manager, she could make numbers shift without raising eyebrows. Her role fit neatly into the kind of plan I dreaded. Someone who manipulates accounts while others applaud how smoothly business runs. Watching her move in public, you would never suspect she could be the architect of theft. That was the terrifying part. I started to test the edges of their work. At the post office, I watched envelopes change hands. At the library, I checked public records under the pretense of research. Ordinary errands became reconnaissance. I learned to photograph receipts with the quickness of a shopkeeper and to fold documents so they hid in my pockets like small, embarrassing truths. The children kept me honest. Liam's earnest questions and Olivier's endless need for bedtime stories forced me back into ordinary rhythms. Their small routines reminded me why I was collecting facts. This wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about protecting them from a future built on theft and lies. One afternoon I found a folded receipt tucked into a book on Alexandria's shelf. It was a small thing, printed and casual, the sort of slip a person might forget. The receipt named a jeweler and carried an Indianapolis address. The line item was a ring, expensive enough to feel like a statement. I traced the letters with my thumb and felt a cold clarity. This was not local gossip. This was a plan that touched other places and other people. Any reasonable person might have taken the receipt to Alexandria and demanded explanation. I did not. Confrontation would scatter evidence and give them time to adapt. Instead, I made a copy and slipped the original back where I'd found it. Later, under a street lamp, I photographed the receipt and placed the image in my hidden folder. Evidence, like a portrait, only becomes undeniable when enough small pieces sit together. It stopped being pride. It became my boy's survival and everything I would protect now. I placed the last copy back into my pocket and stared at the family photograph on the mantel. The boys slept in the next room, breathing easy. I would wake them to a new life if I had to. For now, however, the map had revealed its first coordinate. The next step would be to go to Indianapolis and see what a receipt could not hide. The quiet house held its breath with me as I decided to leave my street behind for a short while, chasing a lead that could change everything. The drive to Indianapolis felt like stepping into a different life. I went with a single aim and a single scrap of paper. The jeweler's receipt and the address. I told myself it was an errand. It was not. It was reconnaissance. Parking a few blocks away, I walked with a low profile, observing the house that matched the receipt. It was a comfortable place, large enough to be noticed, modest enough to be private. From across the street I watched the patterns of mail and movement. At a corner store I asked about the residents without revealing why I cared. The clerk gave me a name and a day. Hudson's Place, he said. Lady comes on Mondays. Always. The words landed like a repeating bell. Mondays, the same day Alexandria had named as an audit trip. A pattern was forming. I circled the block twice and rang a bell on a pretense. No answer, but no hostility either. Just the quiet routines of a well-run house. The small-town ways were a screen. The house kept a private rhythm. I left my number, expecting nothing, and went to the neighbors. Mrs. Calder, an elderly woman with a tidy yard, answered on the second knock. She liked talking about the street's history, so I played the part of a curious visitor. When I mentioned Alexandria's name, her eyes changed. She comes on Mondays, she said without hesitation. They keep to themselves. He's a busy man. Business with city people. She sits in the parlor when she visits, not out with others. Mrs. Calder's casual observations were the sort used to fill Sunday lunches, but they meant more to me. A woman who arrived on a schedule, who kept her meetings in private rooms, suggested deliberate behavior. When I asked about gifts or signs of courtship, she mentioned a ring that had been delivered recently. An expensive one, she believed, and the way the woman wore it after her visits. People whisper about visible changes. They notice jewelry and carriage. At a cafe on the next block, a waitress remembered Alexandria and said quietly that she had once seen a child being dropped off near the house months before. Could have been a friend, the waitress hedged, but the seed had been planted. A child. The image of a small body tied to Alexandria's visits tightened the knot in my chest. Standing beneath a street lamp after leaving the cafe, I thumbed the receipt until the paper softened. The ring was more than ornament. It was a symbol, a transaction, and a promise tied to consequences. Hudson's name carried weight in rooms I had never entered. Deals and arrangements where money moved with practiced ease. Exposing them would not be a private argument but a necessary intervention to protect others from a calculated plan. It made my resolve hard and immediate indeed. Evidence accumulates in ordinary ways. A receipt, a neighbor's memory, the rhythm of visits. Put together they offer a map. I photographed the house from a distance, copied down the names a clerk gave, and recorded Mrs. Calder's account. Each small piece made the picture clearer. Alexandria was not merely visiting a man. She was part of a scheduled life that included gifts, privacy, and possibly a child. I drove back with the city shrinking behind me and a different city of questions forming in my mind. Alexandria's audit trips were explained. They were not solo errands. They were meetings woven into someone else's calendar. The ring and the routine suggested a deliberate plan. A relocation facilitated by gifts and arrangements, not a spontaneous affair. Back home, I spread my notes on the kitchen table. The receipt, the photographs, the neighbor's observations, they made a net that might catch more than shame. It might catch criminal intent. The diary's note about killing was no longer a melodramatic threat. It became proof of intent. I felt the gravity of what I had to do. My sons were asleep down the hall. I would not let their future be designed by someone else's appetite. The next steps became painfully clear. Find an ally who could read ledgers without fear of moneyed influence, document the transfers that might show ghost accounts, and ensure that any exposure would be legal and decisive. The trip to Indianapolis had changed everything. What began with a receipt had widened into a network. Names, dates, a pattern of meetings, and the unmistakable trace of preparation. I was no longer a man living inside a private grief. I was a man on a mission to protect his family, and the map had its first real coordinate. The hunt would take me deeper, but now I had a direction and the faint, hard resolve that I would follow it to the end. The day she told me she was pregnant, the room changed how I understood time. She said the words like a promise and I felt them as an accusation. Alexandria smiled with the same careful calm she used for audits, and my boys, Liam and Olivier, clustered at our feet like ordinary proof that a family persisted. I remember my throat going dry. Dates and small patterns I had been tracking snapped into focus. The Mondays she called audit trips, the late returns, the pockets of sudden generosity. Betrayal, deceit, suspicion. Those words stopped being theories and started to name the house we lived in. I had found a diary months earlier and a folded note that read like a sentence of doom. From that point on, fear and discretion were my companions. When Alexandria announced the pregnancy, I did not explode. I moved into a different kind of work, collecting evidence while continuing to be the father my sons needed. I cooked. I played with the boys. I took them to school. But every ordinary task hid a question and every kiss hid a ledger of doubt. Within a week, I opened a small locked box I had already suspected existed. Inside were plane tickets to Colombia, counterfeit ID cards, and a stack of letters between Alexandria and a man named Hudson. These letters were not breathless love notes. They were logistics, names, dates, instructions. One line referenced Angelina's earlier warning, as if to remind them both of the peril of discovery. It became clear the pregnancy was being used as leverage, a child to bind promises and a passport to a life away from consequence. Infidelity stung, but the criminal scheme cut deeper. The idea that a child could be used as currency made my hands tremble. I understood then that my response could not be reduced to anger. I converted emotion into method. Evidence would be my refuge. I photographed the tickets with a tiny camera hidden in my jacket and copied letters at the city library, disguising my attendance as casual reading. Discretion was not cowardice. It was strategy. My days split into two currents. The outward father, who smiled at neighbors and fixed scraped knees, and the inward investigator, who kept lists of dates and places. Where I had once scribbled shopping notes, I now recorded timestamps, perfume scents lingering on collars, and the names on envelopes. My trading instincts, spotting patterns in noise, helped. Patterns, like markets, reveal where weight shifts. The boys were the reason I learned patience. Liam asked why I was late once. Olivier asked if babies make people leave. I answered with as much truth as I could without undoing their peace. Sometimes people make choices, I told them. We hold to each other. That promise guided every move. I opened a secret bank account in Indiana with savings from trading and stashed cash there like a trader hedges risk. It was not an escape so much as a buffer. I packed essentials in a tin and hid it in the attic. I rehearsed plausible stories for neighbors in case questions came. Preparation is responsibility, not surrender. Angelina's involvement made their plot professional. As a bank manager, she could create ghost ledgers and shift transfer dates so a theft looked like clerical error. That confidence was arrogance. And arrogance leaves trails. Meticulous people leave predictable marks. I photographed receipts, copied letters, and stored everything in a hidden folder. The work was tedious and quiet, but evidence builds like a mosaic, tile by tile until the image is undeniable. Forgiveness seemed far away. For now, justice for my children and exposure of the scheme mattered more than a private closure. When the evidence began to form a pattern implicating more than personal betrayal, implicating theft and collusion, I knew the fight ahead would require more than courage. I would need allies who could not be bought, legal leverage that could not be spun away, and the patience to present facts no wealth could bury. The pregnancy had transformed private deceit into criminal intent. I resolved to follow that trail to its end for my sons and for the truth. Angelina's smile was the kind that rehearsed innocence until it looked like truth. To the town, she was the bank manager who balanced numbers and people with calm. To me, after months of watching, she became the quiet engine of a crime. The diaries, receipts, and letters pointed to her hands in the ledger. The scheme stopped looking like a reckless affair and began to look like planned theft. Angelina worked surgically. She placed transfers so they hid in the noise of payrolls and vendor payments. Ghost accounts are built from small changes. An invoice nudged here, a date shifted there, so an $800,000 diversion could appear as clerical rearrangement. Her talent was making the unusual look mundane. Inside the bank she kept a rhythm. Early mornings, scanned checks, and an attention that made colleagues trust the process. Outside, she spent time with Alexandria. Trust between privileged people turned into corrosion mixed with appetite. Her care became a shield for conspiracy. At first, the idea felt absurd. A bank manager committing fraud seemed cinematic. Yet evidence accumulates patiently. I photographed receipts with her initials and found an account number in a ledger that pointed to a shell corporation. Entries moved precisely when Alexandria was away. Deposits appeared late at night. A pattern formed. I moved cautiously. Exposing a bank official without solid proof would ruin credibility. Discretion remained my rule. I met Evelyn, a bank secretary, at a grocery and learned what she noticed. Late deposits, oddly filed forms, and envelopes bypassing routine checks. Evelyn's observations supplied stitches in a pattern I could not have seen alone. Evelyn also revealed Angelina's arrogance. She believed tiny differences would go unchecked. That arrogance became a weakness. Meticulous people leave traces, and patterns can be traced. I learned the bank's language so I could see how theft hides in jargon. Angelina understood how to convert a line item into freedom. The less glamorous the method, the more effective. Her competence had turned into complicity. At home, I kept my roles separate. I taught my boys to whistle while we worked the garden and read them bedtime stories. Under the kitchen light, I tended a folder of copies, receipts, tickets, letters, with dates and short notes. The work was tedious and quiet, but evidence builds like a mosaic. Tile by tile until the image is undeniable. There were moments I wanted to confront her directly, but confrontation would give them time to cover tracks. I continued collecting witnesses. Ordinary people topple conspiracies with small observations. A clerk's memory, a neighbor's recollection, a misfiled receipt. These are the things that break systems. Tracing ghost accounts became a craft learned out of necessity. I began asking questions at the factory, noting whether invoices matched shipments. Clerks remember small things: a pallet that didn't arrive, an invoice with no signature, a truck that turned up empty. Those casual notes mattered. I met an old acquaintance who had worked bookkeeping. He examined photocopies and confirmed what my instincts feared. Small manipulations can funnel large sums if someone in authority allows them. That confirmation hardened my plan. Evidence needs order. Dates, copies, and witnesses. I annotated each photocopy with context. Who mentioned it, where I found it, and why it mattered. I kept a list of people who observed oddities. A warehouse foreman, a clerk who noted after-hours entries, and a neighbor who saw Alexandria leave with a valise. Ordinary testimonies assembled into a narrative. Watching Angelina's competence become complicity felt like seeing a familiar house stripped of its family. There was anger but also focus. Anger is loud. Evidence is quiet. I chose quiet. I prepared to present the case to someone of integrity who would not be swayed by wealth. For now I gathered, copied, and waited for exposure to bring justice rather than rumor. I knew patience was my weapon. Haste would allow them to hide records, and wealth has power to twist facts unless evidence was thorough and public indeed. The work of building a case is quiet and almost domestic. It is folding papers into small order and teaching fear to behave. I learned early that noise breeds defense. If you shout, they hide. If you whisper and collect, they reveal themselves. After confirming Angelina's role and mapping Hudson's address, I turned to methodical investigation. My trade in small goods taught me patience and the value of record-keeping. Those instincts translated well into gathering evidence. I would not rely on accusation. I would file proof. I bought a tiny camera the size of a matchbox and learned how to photograph documents on the fly. I became practiced at slipping a receipt under my palm at a cafe table and angling the lens toward a ledger. At the library, I sat under dim lamps and used public photocopiers to duplicate letters and tickets, careful to avoid staff who might ask questions. Discretion shaped every movement. I rehearsed errands so that no single trip looked exceptional. Where others saw nothing, I saw a trail. I compared hotel and ticket timestamps with Alexandria's ledger entries. I cross-referenced shipping manifests with vendor invoices. I traced vendor numbers used in factory payments and matched them to addresses for shell corporations. Ghost accounts leave fingerprints, a routing variation, a repeated address that resolves to an office box, an altered beneficiary name. I learned to read these nuances like a man reads weather. Duplicate copies became my currency of safety. I kept originals where I could not be accused of removing them and carried copies I photographed and annotated. My notes included dates, the source of the document, witness names, and why the item mattered. Each copy had a backstory: who had handed it to me, where I found it, and the context that made it suspicious. That context is what turns gossip into prosecutable evidence. Security risk was constant. Alexandria and Angelina could not know what I had compiled. I changed routines. I visited the market at odd hours, spoke to friends in code, and used public places to copy sensitive materials. I memorized the bank's layout and noted which clerks handled which files. Observation was less about catching someone in the act and more about noticing small patterns until they could not be ignored. At night, I organized my copies into a narrative. I wanted a story that a prosecutor could follow without needing me to dramatize anything. I prepared appendices of receipts, timelines, and witness summaries. The work was administrative and painfully slow, but it was also an act of courage and strategy. Courage does not always roar. Sometimes it files papers. I widened my search to county records and business filings. A shell company appeared in another county. Property deeds hinted at transfers through associates of Hudson. Those dry documents connected names from the letters to real estate moves. Bureaucracy, mundane as it is, supplied structure to the scheme. I rehearsed an anonymous delivery, practiced leaving envelopes in a mailbox, and considered contingencies. Legal counsel who could not be bought, a trusted friend to hold duplicates, and an exit plan to place my sons beyond the reach of their appetite if necessary without delay now. Maintaining discretion cost comforts and some friendships, but every copied form and annotated note was protection for my boys. Piece by piece, the case grew. The next step would be to find an ally who could turn this silent case into action. For now, I continued. Methodical, patient, and inexorable. The hardest decision was choosing someone worthy of the secrets I held. I had built a silent case, photocopies, dates, ticket stubs, and a ledger of odd payments, but evidence only matters if trusted by someone who will act. Wealth can buy spin and silence. It can also corrode institutions. I needed an ally who was incorruptible, who would not be seduced by status or intimidated by threats. That meant someone outside Alexandria's circle and someone with a track record of following facts. I thought of many names and discarded them for private reasons. A friendly lawyer might be compromised. A local judge could be pressured. I returned to a man I had met once years earlier, a quiet official named Nuno. Inspector Nuno, who had a reputation for refusing bribes and closing cases others abandoned. He was the kind of civil servant who believed in lists, evidence, and procedure. Importantly, his record showed an unwillingness to bend. Choosing Nuno was not sentimental. It was strategy. I had watched him at community meetings, listened to how he spoke about records and timelines, and seen how he demanded receipts in court. He had a particular intolerance for shortcuts and a patience for paperwork. That patience became our common language. I did not approach him openly. I could not. Going into a police station with a folder and a face would have been theatrical and dangerous. Instead, I prepared an anonymous delivery. I placed photocopies into a nondescript brown envelope, annotated each item with a brief explanation, and included a cover letter addressed simply, Inspector Nuno, evidence regarding attempted diversion of factory funds. The letter explained the dates, the transfers, and the names in plain, factual language. I wrote to show patterns, not to inflame. Delivering the envelope required ritual. I scouted the courthouse days in advance and learned the rhythm of foot traffic. I watched where inspectors left their coats, which doors remained unlocked, and where mail slots were neglected. On a wet morning, I walked to a back entrance with the envelope tucked under an umbrella and slipped it into a drop box disguised by an old mail slot. I then walked several blocks, pretended to run an errand, and checked from a distance to see who retrieved it. The next morning, rumors moved quietly. Nuno had received a package and would be reviewing records. Officers began making routine inquiries at the factory and looking at files with professional coldness. Someone had followed a map, and now authorities were tracing the lines. Even with Nuno involved, I could not relax. Wealth is weather that shifts landscapes unpredictably. I kept backup copies in a trusted friend's safe and instructed a relative in the capital to act as contact should I disappear. I packed a bag and kept an exit route to Brian's house rehearsed. Escape was contingency, not surrender. To the outside world I remained the same man. I pushed carts at market, called my sons to dinner, and smiled at neighbors. Inside, though, I felt the momentum of exposure. It was neither triumph nor vindication. It was a test of whether institutions could still work against influence. Justice is neither immediate nor certain. It requires diligence and allies who honor evidence over power. When the arrest came later, it would be messy and bureaucratic. Selecting an ally had been the pivot. Without Nuno's willingness to look past appearances and follow the paper trail, the evidence I had prepared might have dissolved into whispers. Choosing integrity over showmanship saved my boy's future. My role shifted again, from silent investigator to a man who had to live with public exposure, explain the truth in daylight, and protect a family rebuilt on evidence, courage, and hope. I left instructions with Brian to secure records and hold the children's birth certificates. Choosing an ally meant preparing a quiet network of ordinary people who would act if I could not. It was a responsibility I accepted. 10 days is a small number until you watch a plan count down toward yours. When I realized the transfer date was approaching, complexity and urgency took over. A criminal scheme is a machine, and every machine has parts. Accounts, signatures, timings, and people willing to follow instructions. I had mapped the machine, traced the routes where money would travel, and prepared the evidence that would show the pattern. But mapping is only half the work. The other half is timing the reveal so the net catches the whole group, not merely a dangling piece. In those final days I split my life into two careful tracks. By day I kept up appearances. I stood behind the market stall, greeted customers, and answered questions about the goods. By night I compiled binders and arranged photocopies in the order they would make sense to a prosecutor. Each binder had tabbed sections: invoices, letters, bank entries, and witness statements. I annotated every item with a brief note on why it was relevant. That organization mattered. Public institutions respond to clarity and order. Alexandria grew increasingly nervous. She was generous in odd ways, as if rehearsing farewell. One evening she slapped a large envelope onto the table and said it was for bills. The gesture felt like rehearsal for departure. Her voice was thin and her eyes moved too fast. The look of someone used to control confronted with its loss is a dangerous thing. In her movements I saw both fear and calculation. I used small tests. I let the boys ask simple questions while I watched her reaction. I sent an anonymous note to a courier she sometimes used to see if she altered routes. I watched her phone patterns and noted when she cut calls short upon my entry. Those tiny experiments showed me how tight the web was woven. Preparation also meant protecting the children. I told Liam and Olivier that we might move and that some things would be different. I packed an overnight bag and stowed copies of birth certificates and school records in a trusted friend's safe. I rehearsed a route to Brian's house. Escape was insurance. Not the plan, but an option to keep them safe. I tightened my network. Evelyn agreed to watch for internal irregularities and to send a discreet signal if transfers appeared out of sequence. A neighbor agreed to watch for late-night lights at Alexandria's study. These ordinary acts of vigilance were the unseen arms of my strategy. On the penultimate night I finalized the anonymous envelope to Inspector Nuno and indexed the binder tabs so a prosecutor could follow facts without needing dramatic testimony. Evidence must be self-sufficient. Authority then confirms details. It cannot be built on rumor. My hands shook the morning of the transfer as I sat in my car reviewing the timeline. I had arranged for the evidence to reach the inspector as the transfer began, timed to coincide with the movement. The goal was to stop the scheme in motion and to catch the act itself. There was risk in every choice. If the envelope failed to reach its intended recipient or if someone intercepted it, the scheme might slip away. If I acted too early, they could patch holes. If I waited too long, they could leave. The balance was thin and dangerous. But once choice was made, it sharpened my resolve. By noon the morning of the transfer, a calm settled over the house. I kissed my boys and told them I loved them, as if that might steady them for any sudden change. I walked to the market and moved among my carts and goods, each transaction normal as the clock ticked. I watched small mercies, a customer's laugh, the clink of change, the boys' footsteps. The final hours were a strange mixture of ordinary life and the preparation for exposure. I felt the mechanism I had tracked inside the bank begin to turn. Everything depended on timing, evidence, and the courage of ordinary people who would not be bought. It felt like standing behind a door and listening for the exact second to pull it open. I prayed, not for vengeance, but for protection, for justice, and for a chance to rebuild the family my sons deserved. They came without fanfare. Men with badges unfolding a quiet, irreversible business. I was at the market when the raid began, hands sticky with mango juice, watching life move while I listened for anything like thunder. I had trusted the process and prepared evidence. For months, I had organized receipts, letters, and photocopies into binders that told a single story. A pattern of deceit, siphoned accounts, and scheduled transfers. The day those binders met authority, exposure moved from the kitchen table into a courtroom-ready form. The officers entered Alexandria's office with precision. No cinematic shouting, only the soft clack of file cabinets and paper being rifled. They photographed ledgers, seized drives, and took statements. I watched as two figures were led away in separate cars. Seeing them in cuffs, my wife and her accomplice, merged grief with relief I could not name. Investigators found the ghost accounts I had suspected. Invoice dates were altered to mask transfers. Tickets and travel plans showed intent to leave. My camera photos and photocopies matched entries in the company books. Numbers and dates can transform suspicion into charge. Evidence properly organized has power rumors cannot match. Inspector Nuno moved with a professional calm, focusing on facts rather than gossip. I never admitted I had supplied the binder. Secrecy had been my armor. He treated the work like assembling a machine, part by careful part, and his steadiness gave the case weight. The town reacted with the small cruelties of rumor. The thief's husband, they called me. Neighbors who used to nod crossed the street. Public humiliation complicated the moral clarity I felt. Still, the legal machinery turned slow and deliberately, and that slow motion was necessary to ensure the case would hold. Legal actions followed. Because Alexandria was pregnant, authorities placed her under supervised confinement until the child was born, balancing the unborn child's welfare with legal process. Angelina, who had engineered ledger manipulations, was detained and charged. Hudson's name surfaced through transactions and phone records. His connections could not shield him from tracing. At home, I told the boys small truths. Some adults make choices that hurt others, and justice works by proving wrongdoing in courts, not gossip. A father's role in crisis becomes caregiving and explanation. I taught them words like evidence and courage as practical tools. There were moments I felt heroic and moments I felt ashamed. Bringing evidence forward required methodical patience. I had chosen accumulation and discreet delivery so the law might act properly. That patience prevented a spectacle that wealth might have spun into questions about motive rather than fact. The first hearings were technical. Lawyers argued over affidavits while prosecutors displayed account trails. My binders were examined closely. Witnesses gave calm testimony. Courtrooms do not serve instant drama. They demand verification so verdicts can withstand challenge. This sober process was the kind of justice that endures. When the arrests were carried out, I felt relief as if a fire had been contained, yet the burn remained. Our privacy had been invaded and our name stained. But the diversion was stopped and employees' livelihoods were saved. The exposure had not been about vengeance but about preventing further harm. Reporters hovered but the facts mattered more than headlines. I focused on concrete tasks, payrolls corrected, vendor checks reissued, and an internal audit launched to protect workers. Evidence had not only accused, it had prevented losses that would have wiped out families' incomes. Inspector Nuno offered a private nod in the courthouse hallway. "You built this case well," he said, naming the craft. Careful documentation, chain of custody, and measured delivery. I kept my role anonymous. Discretion preserved the integrity of the work. The courtroom process was painstaking. Accountants traced funds, witnesses recalled odd deliveries, and prosecutors wove a timeline. Defense lawyers probed every photocopy, but my duplicates and annotations closed many gaps. Ordinary witnesses, warehouse clerks, a bank secretary, and Evelyn became crucial. Their courage stitched ordinary observations into formal testimony. Neighbors murmured and some friends drifted away. New allies appeared. People who would not be bought. Liam wanted facts and dates. Olivier wanted bedtime stories and reassurance. I balanced truth and comfort. Fatherhood was steadying two young hearts while institutions did their work. By the time hearings and plea talks matured, consequences took shape. The company secured wages and pursued restitution. Hudson's reputation faltered. He negotiated pleas but could not erase the ledger trail. The scandal had cost, but it also allowed repair. Jobs saved, accounts corrected, and a system to recover lost funds. That night I sat at the kitchen table with fresh photocopies spread like a map. Arrests were a hinge that turned private rescue into public accountability. The work ahead, protecting witnesses, testifying, and ensuring exposure became justice, was necessary. I hoped the law's clarity would restore safety and truth. We would rebuild, steady, patient, and unbowed. Shame is the currency small towns spend when scandal arrives. After the arrests, the courtroom became the place where the quiet, patient work of documentation met the formalities of law. My photocopies, photographs, and witness notes were parceled into exhibits. Prosecutors traced ghost accounts and altered invoices. Defense attorneys tested chain of custody. The process was deliberate and dry, but its weight mattered. Evidence had to be bulletproof so restitution and sentence would withstand appeal. Alexandria's pregnancy complicated proceedings. The court placed her on supervised home confinement with electronic monitoring until she delivered, a measure intended to protect the unborn child while preserving legal process. After the birth and a full trial, she was convicted of fraud and conspiracy and ultimately sentenced to 12 years. That sentence carried both punishment and the stark cost of choices she made. Angelina, the bank manager who engineered the ghost ledgers, was convicted as well and later received a 15-year sentence appropriate to her central role in the scheme. Hudson's downfall took a different path. He negotiated plea deals, offering cooperation and restitution to reduce exposure. Wealth buys options. Influence buys legal counsel. He avoided the most severe prison terms but forfeited public trust and much of his business. The Ledger trail had eroded his empire's credibility even when bargains softened formal penalties. Public reaction was brutal in ordinary ways. People who had once smiled in the market crossed the street. The nickname, the thief's husband, traveled fast and burned like gossip. Labels stick because they simplify moral complexity. I felt humiliation in small measures. A turned head, a quiet refusal of a handshake. And yet there were other responses. A neighbor supplying groceries, a former client offering a discreet job lead, and Evelyn quietly testifying in court despite risk. Courage often arrives in low places, and their observations became crucial. The trials revealed methodical criminality, altered payees, shifted invoice dates, and shell entities that received staged transfers. Accountants demonstrated how small increments could aggregate into a massive diversion. Warehouse staff recounted mismatched shipments. My duplicates and annotations helped prosecutors build timelines so the court could see pattern rather than a single error. That pattern established intent, a central element in securing convictions. Even as legal outcomes formed, pragmatic steps followed. The company initiated recovery plans and worked with prosecutors to secure restitution for affected employees. Savings accounts were audited and payrolls corrected so workers would not be left paying for the theft. That repair work mattered more than applause. Preventing harm to families proved the evidence had purpose beyond punishment. Moving the boys to the capital was necessary. Our life narrowed to essentials while I rebuilt a modest livelihood trading goods and learning marketing by night. Liam and Olivier adjusted with resilience I admired. They asked difficult questions. Why did their mother leave? Why did people point? And I answered with measured truth. I taught them that justice is a process and that accountability can include mercy for the innocent and firm consequences for those who plotted harm. Scandal leaves marks beyond court transcripts. Friendships shifted, some permanently. Families took sides. Even so, I discovered quiet tendrils of support. Neighbors who refused to treat my children as pariahs, a minister who offered prayers without sermons, and a community organizer who insisted the workers receive help. Shame does not erase kindness, and that counterbalance kept me moving. When sentences were handed down, the city measured them in years and paperwork. Alexandria's 12 years and Angelina's 15. Hudson's negotiated outcome cost him reputation and influence even without the longest terms behind bars. Those penalties were the legal closure the accounts required, but the social closure was a longer labor. Rebuilding a name requires persistent daily acts of decency, and that was my task now. I returned to market stalls with a different posture. Quieter, more intentional. My work, selling goods, learning marketing, became a rebirth of sorts. I kept teaching them about resilience and responsibility, about forgiveness when it was genuine, and about relentless accountability when deeds demanded it. In time we would rebuild income, reputation, and a small, honest life that reflected courage over scandal. Leaving our quiet town felt like a small exile we chose to protect the boys. We moved to the capital with only what we needed. The anonymity helped. The market there did not know our past. I rented a tiny flat above Gwen's Minimart and took a stall selling basics. At first my days were long and my nights longer. I bought crates, negotiated prices, and learned to read customers' needs the way I once read markets. Every sale was a small proof that we could survive without someone else's money. My trading skills became survival skills. By day, I sold goods and learned the discipline of margins. By night, I studied marketing from pamphlets and borrowed books. I started advising neighbors on display and pricing, turning simple lessons into paying work. That practical independence was empowering. I earned with my hands and my head, and the boys saw a different model of dignity than the town's gossip had offered. Raising Liam and Olivier through that season tested me. Liam sought facts and leaned into study. He became methodical and exact. Olivier wanted laughter and routine. He patched the days with humor. I balanced honesty and protection, telling them what they needed in measures they could carry. People make choices, I said, and then we repair what we can. Those conversations were our way of holding truth without tearing their childhood. Money was scarce. I reinvested small profits, grew tiny supply lines, and kept meticulous ledgers. Those records, once a tool of deceit in other hands, became the backbone of honest trade. I taught helpers to record deliveries, to check invoices, and to keep receipts. That discipline meant we were accountable and harder to cheat. It also built trust with suppliers. Neighbors hardened at first, then thawed. A bakery owner, Mrs. Rashi, gave me tips on inventory. Brian offered storage in his garage until I could afford a proper room. When a county magazine ran a short note about my market skills, a few new customers came and morale lifted. Respect returns slowly. It returns when work is steady and visible. I began to consult small businesses. How to display stock, how to rotate inventory, and how simple flyers could increase turnover. Those modest contracts widened my circle, and steady sales turned into small savings. The work taught me marketing in practice. Attention to timing, clarity of message, and good manners in negotiation. My focus on detail that had once caught Alexandria's deception now became an asset. Every day, I practiced restraint and persistence. The rhythm of inventory count, supplier calls, and evening study hours disciplined me. Perseverance was learning to do boring work well. That stubbornness, more than quick wins, created growth. The boys adjusted. Liam excelled in school and began to imagine engineering paths. Olivier found joy in local football and small friendships. I watched them relearn confidence as the market earned our rent and attention replaced rumor. Parenting in that era was about steady presence. School projects, homework help, and weekly stories that replaced gossip with narrative. Slowly, our modest capital grew. We saved enough to consider a longer-term plan. It was still far from triumph. Scandal left scars that did not vanish. But new respect and reliable income proved powerful remedies. The lesson I taught my sons was simple. Dignity is daily work, and resilience is the habit you build by choice. Over the next few years, my marketing work quietly matured. I learned to stage promotions that moved stock, weekend discounts timed to payday, neighborhood cross-promotions, and clear signage that drew attention. A small county paper ran a note about one autumn sale that cleared stale inventory and brought new customers. That mention converted curiosity into steady foot traffic. With growing confidence, I hired 2 helpers, trained them in record-keeping, and insisted every sale be logged. Transparency became our edge. By documenting deliveries and invoices, we rebuilt supplier trust and reduced losses. Those routines, plain and repetitive, protected the business from the very schemes I had fought. Hudson's shadow lingered like a cautionary echo. His ability to hide misdeeds taught me to make everything visible. The work reshaped me from a man defined by scandal into someone who taught commerce and dignity. My sons watched and learned that empowerment comes from steady work, disciplined records, and the courage to keep showing up when being seen feels risky. We kept going together without surrender. Forgiveness arrived at my door one rainy afternoon, carrying a child's small backpack. It was 1985 and the years had layered us with habits of thrift and stubborn hope. I remember standing at the stoop when Hudson appeared, hair thinner, suit threadbare, and a child clinging to his hand. Henry, small and solemn, looked like any boy who had slept in too many unfamiliar beds. Hudson's eyes found mine without pretense. He was not asking for pity. He was asking for a place to begin again. I felt everything at once. Old anger, the taste of betrayed trust, and a prompt of compassion I had cultivated for the sons wronged by the deception. There are breaks in life that demand either revenge or repair. I chose repair. I invited them in, offered a warm bowl of soup, and listened. Forgiveness did not erase the past. It simply allowed a new story to start with the child's needs at the center. Hudson was not a penitent man rehearsed in contrition. He spoke lightly of mistakes and hard negotiations. Legal battles had bankrupted him. The empire he once commanded was crumbling. He had fought with Alexandria's family for custody and ultimately arrived with Henry in need of care. His skills were in finance and in bold negotiations. I had market smarts and the dignity of steady work. Together we had different assets and different liabilities. We started small, a shared idea to expand Gwen's Minimart into a larger shop that could serve neighborhoods more broadly. Hudson offered seed funds from a dwindling reserve and business acumen. I offered marketing strategy and ground-level knowledge of supply chains. Our partnership was pragmatic and awkward at first. Old wounds surfaced in meetings. I remembered a ring receipt and a plane ticket. He remembered business calculations. We spoke frankly about boundaries. Money kept separate, roles clearly defined, and public transparency required. Turning the Minimart into a supermarket required planning, trust, and sheer elbow grease. We negotiated better supplier terms by pooling orders, invested in shelving and refrigeration, and redesigned the shop to make goods visible and attractive. I introduced promotional mechanics I had tested over years: rotating sales, bulk discounts for regulars, and clear labeling. Hudson reconnected with former contacts and handled invoicing and the larger creditor negotiations. The community watched with curiosity. Some were skeptical. After all, the man they once despised was back, hand extended to the husband he had wronged. Others were quietly supportive. People prefer practical solutions. We hired local helpers, trained them in the ledger discipline that had kept us honest, and offered predictable wages. Those jobs mattered. They replaced uncertainty with paychecks and re-established that commerce could be a force for stability. By 1988, the supermarket had grown beyond the Minimart's walls. We rebranded as Prestige Group, not because of grandeur but because it sounded reliable. Sales grew through practical marketing campaigns and predictable inventory. My marketing instincts and Hudson's negotiation skills fit into an unaccustomed rhythm. He handled credit lines and corporate discussions while I focused on customers and campaigns. The partnership was a strange mix of pragmatism and fragile trust. Success did not erase history or pain. There were days Hudson's presence recalled a wound, and evenings when regret was a quiet guest at dinner. Yet the business's growth became a glue we did not anticipate. It bound workers, paid wages, and created a family whose structure was less about blood and more about respect. We built a life where Henry could belong alongside Liam and Olivier without contest. Our public image shifted as the supermarket thrived. Articles in county papers celebrated a local business turned effective regional player. The men who once sniffed at us now came with orders and handshakes. Respect came slowly and required consistent honesty. Our marketing campaigns, clear pricing, outreach to nearby schools and community events, became part of our identity. We used visibility as defense. The more transparent the ledgers and operations, the less room there was for deception. Personally, partnering with Hudson taught me how forgiveness could be strategic. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing a path that protected children and the future. I kept records, enforced boundaries, and insisted on accountability. He provided networks and funds he had retained. I provided discipline and a public persona that honored honest work. By 1989 we were no longer repairing. We were building. Prestige Group did not sweep history away. Instead, it provided a platform to convert past pain into livelihood for many people. My boys grew into men working in the business. Henry became a brother and a coworker. His presence softened old hurts and gave new purpose to the family table. That unexpected alliance became one of the most difficult and rewarding chapters of my life. We endured together. Legacy is measured in what you build for others after the worst has passed. When Prestige Group finally left the Minimart stage and occupied a larger space, I felt the slow sum of years adding up into something practical. We expanded shelving, added refrigeration for perishables, and opened a second location that served a different neighborhood. Our growth was steady, not flashy. It grew from clear ledgers, reliable suppliers, and constant attention to customers' needs. Marketing became more than sales. It became a promise that what we advertised matched what we delivered. My sons were central to that promise. Liam became a software engineer, bringing systems and efficiency that modernized our inventory management and reduced shrinkage. Olivier became a business consultant, advising local ventures and turning our mistakes into lessons he taught others. Henry, who arrived as an unexpected child entangled in past betrayals, became our brand strategist. He understood how to shape the supermarket's public face so transparency was visible and trust tangible. Their careers reflected the value of steady work and disciplined skill. Working alongside my boys changed the meaning of success. We argued about margins and suppliers, comforted one another during slow months, and celebrated small wins as if they were victories. The supermarket paid wages and created local jobs, and that practical outcome anchored my pride. The store was a place where community trust could be rebuilt through honest practice. Paychecks, predictable schedules, and clear receipts. Alexandria's release years later, documented in 1990, opened complex wounds. Her return did not produce a cinematic reconciliation. It forced quiet reckonings. Olivier wanted answers and met with her. Liam and Henry kept distance. Forgiveness, I learned, was not a single act but a set of boundaries and repeated choices. Angelina's later attempts at reconciliation were complicated by the years she spent away and by public memory. Legal sentences, 12 years for Alexandria and 15 for Angelina, had altered many lives. When Alexandria died in 2002, the family gathered with mixed feelings. Her death did not erase the harm. It reframed how history sat between us. We acknowledged the complexity. The woman who had been a mother, the architect of betrayal, and a person whose choices changed many lives. Mourning did not mean forgetting. It meant holding contradictions without pretending they were simpler than they were. The supermarket's routines became ritual lessons. Monthly audits, transparent receipts, and community events reinforced our position as a trustworthy business. Marketing messages emphasized fairness, clear prices, ethical sourcing when possible, and partnerships with local suppliers. We used visibility as defense. The more open the accounts and the more public our practices, the less room there was for hidden schemes. That discipline became a moral fiber of the firm. 8 grandchildren now race through the aisles and sit in staff rooms while adults talk business. They demand cookies and funny faces while learning real lessons about work. Their laughter is a balm for old wounds. It is proof that life can reweave itself. I watch them and think the best legacy is not wealth but the daily structures that make life livable. Steady jobs, reliable paydays, and a community that trusts the market. We invested in apprenticeships and small scholarships for local youth. Empowerment so young people might learn trade skills and marketing rather than be seduced by easy schemes. Staff training emphasized ethics and transparency. Those choices multiplied impact beyond our balance sheet. I measured success in the number of steady paychecks, in employees who stayed for years, and in young people who found a trade. That, more than any headline, felt like triumph. My days are quieter now. At 75, I move through the store greeting people by name and sometimes checking invoices. I listen more than I speak. When someone asks about the old scandal, I answer briefly and redirect to what matters now. Children's schooling, payroll dates, and the next community sale. The past is not erased, but it is not the whole of who we are. If there is a lesson I would pass along, it is this. Courage often looks like small things. Filing photocopies, insisting on receipts, refusing to be bought. Resilience is daily work. Keeps stores open, pays wages, and teaches children by example. Forgiveness must be coupled with accountability. A community that forgives without requiring change sets itself up for repetition. My legacy, imperfect and earned, is a supermarket that feeds people and a family that chooses responsibility over ruin. After everything I've been through, I still find myself asking questions I don't have answers to. What does loyalty mean when the people closest to you can so easily trade it for greed and deception? Can family still be called family when betrayal becomes their strongest bond? When someone already has wealth yet still craves more, does it prove that covetousness is a hunger that can never be satisfied? And what about justice? Do you believe it truly exists, or is it only for those powerful enough to bend it in their favor? I've told you my story, but now I want to hear your truth. Share your take in the comments. Tell me how you see betrayal, greed, family loyalty, deception, wealth, covetousness, and justice. Do they mean the same to you as they came to mean for me, or something entirely different? And while you're here, make sure you subscribe for more stories like mine, because the lessons in them are ones none of us can afford to ignore.